Welcome to the show, it's time to dive in, where stories unfold and journeys begin. Les is here to guide you through. In this world there's always something new. Feel the beat, the rhythm in the air. Laugh and learn, we got a vibe to share. Tune in, turn up, don't miss out. Les is made, that's what it's all about. Let's get started, light and bright. Les is made, it's your spotlight. Here we go, don't be late. Join the fun and celebrate.
Could the reason be that I am having a not so good day is because the moon and the sun in my astrology horoscope is bringing me negative energy? Now, I don't know if that's the answer, but my guest today would likely know that. Hi, I'm Les of the Les Is Made podcast, and my guest today is Susan Reynolds, who is all about horoscopes and knows the ins and outs of the field of astrology. I learned some stuff through our little interview, and just had a good conversation talking about a little history and horoscopes, the different celestial signs that we all are. We are all born under one of the 12 zodiac signs, and she explains it all in our little conversation. So I hope you enjoyed this fun and exciting talk of the stars. Hey, this is Les of the Les Is Made podcast, and I am ready to talk about all things astrology and the powers of the stars with the guest I have today, Ms. Susan Reynolds. Please, I'm a
Hi.
Sagittarius. Tell me what that's supposed to mean about me.
Well, we have 12 different sun signs, meaning that whenever you're born under one of these 12 signs. And one thing that people need to understand about astrology is that it does not control your life. It does not, have special power of what you can and cannot do, but it is an influence. And what I tell people when they come to me for a reading or want to understand their chart is that going to an astrologer is a way like going to an investment counselor. You go to them for their advice, for their expertise, and they may say, well, I think gold is going to do well, but you might want to move money out of this or that. They're going to give you their advice based on what they know. Doesn't mean you have to take it. You're in charge of your life, not your
That's right.
chart, not the astrologer. So you
That's
may say,
right. My
what? I
wife
don't
runs
think
my
that guy
life.
knows what he's talking about. I think gold's going to tank. Yes. So always understand that astrology is not in charge of you. It's not magical. There's no belief system in it. But it is a little bit extra information as a Sagittarius. One of the things that I'm going to tell you that you probably already know about yourself is that Sag tends to be a tad impatient. Whatever they want now. Let's make it happen. Let's do it. Sagittarius is a fire sign.
Ooh. Yeah, that's another thing I want to get
So
into.
you're not impatient?
No, no. I mean, unless you ask my wife, she would say I have no patience at all. But we're not talking about that. I want to know what it means by like a fire sign, a water sign. What does that bring to the table when talking with astrology? I've never
Here,
understood that.
in astrology, there are 4 elements:
Okay.
fire, earth, air, water.
Okay.
So each one of the 12 signs is associated with one of these 4 elements. And each one of these 4 elements has its own personality. So if you were born under a fire sign, Sagittarius is a fire sign, you may have a fiery personality. You're going to be more social, more outgoing, more action oriented. There is a warmth to the fire signs. People tend to like fire signs. They're fun, they're engaging, they're going to work a room. They're not going to sit around and watch the paint dry. They want to get out there. They can be physical. Let's mow the yard. Let's go on a hike. Let's have an adventure. Let's go around the world. So fire signs are fun. Who doesn't want them? But they can be impatient and they can get excited about something and then get bored with it fairly easily. So they can make everybody else crazy because, oh yeah, I'm not into that anymore. I'm doing this. Now, if you're an earth sign, that's a very different kind of energy. think of the earth. You're grounded. You're practical. So the fire sign is, let's have a party. And the earth sign is going to say, great, who's paying for it? Where are we going to have it? What kind of food are we going to have? Is anybody a vegan? The earth sign is going to think of the practical realities. Is somebody cleaning up after this? Who's writing a check for the party? So fire signs can get impatient with that. Like, oh, stop harshing my buzz. I just want to enjoy myself. But the earth signs are going to be much more practical. They're going to make a plan. They want to see it through. So the earth signs tend to stay with things longer. They may not get on board as quickly, but once they do, they're going to see it through to the end. Now, the air signs are all about the mind. They're up here in the intellect. Air signs want to talk. Air signs want to engage. They want to share ideas. So when you are born under an air sign, you may want to ask lots of questions. Think of the 2 or the 3-year-olds who say, Mommy, why is the sky blue? Why does the rain fall down instead of up? Why do we have a sun? Why do we stay on the earth and not fly? Air sign children can make their parents crazy because they never stop asking questions. Their minds go in multiple directions. And so they're the teenager that's, their parent opens the door and they're trying to do their homework and they're on the phone and the TV is going. And the parent's like, you can't do your homework like this. But the air says, I'm good. You can go. They want and need lots of mental stimulation. And so they're good writers. They're good teachers. They want that information, that knowledge. They keep digging. But they can be a little scattered sometimes. They want so much information, want to understand so much all at once, they can, not focus as well as maybe the earth sign. So the last quality, the last element that we have is water. The water signs are the signs of emotion. Water signs are sensitive. They feel everything. They're intuitive. They're going to react emotionally first. Air signs are sort of like the therapist going, and how do you feel about that? And water signs want to experience their feelings. So they can get their feelings hurt pretty easily. Doesn't mean they're going to share that with you. Water signs tend to be rather private. They're going to keep things to themselves. They may hide. They're not nearly as social as a fire sign. So fire sign wants to be outgoing and doing. The water sign's like, no, you go. I'm fine. I'll be here in the corner. Leave me alone. But they're very nurturing. They're very giving, very compassionate. So they're very good friends. They're very good partners. They're very good at helping other people. But sometimes their own emotional needs don't get met because they're so busy supporting everybody else. So everybody has all 4 of these elements represented in their chart somewhere.
Really?
But you may have more of one or less of another.
Now, how does that factor in?
Somewhere in your chart, you have all 4.
Okay, but how do you calculate that in your
personality?
I said, how do you calculate that in your personality?
That's where you look at the whole chart.
Okay.
When you're looking at somebody's astrology chart, you're going to look at what is their sun sign. You're Sagittarius.
Okay.
I don't know what your moon sign is. I don't know what your rising sign is. Let's say you're a sun sign Sagittarius and your moon sign is Gemini.
Where do you get all this?
Be all over the place.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand how do you get all that information just from the stars? Is it like when you're born or like the weather or how's that work out?
Yes, when you're born, what a natal chart is, it is actually almost like a picture or a photograph of where the planets were when you were born. Like you came out into the world and they snapped it and said, this is where all the planets were. And so each planet, we have 10 planets. I'm going to refer to the sun and moon as planets for the sake of convenience. We have 10 planets and they all have their own personality. Each planet is part of us and represents a different part of us. The sun represents our outward personality, our willpower, our force, something that's central to the core of who we are. The moon is going to represent our emotions, what makes us feel secure. What is our childhood like? Where are our emotional needs? Each one of these 10 planets has its own personality.
Hmm.
And then it's going to be in a sign, and you put it together. It's like putting together puzzle pieces. I always tell people, and I'm teaching a beginning astrology class right now, and I tell them that the three main components of astrology are the planets, the signs, and the houses. Once you know those, everything else builds on that. It's just more and more and more.
Okay,
So
now I
when I
gotta.
look at that chart, we mathematically compute.
No, I was gonna let you finish because I was gonna say you said houses. What's a house? I'm trying to understand that. What's a house?
In astrology, a computer program will mathematically calculate where the planets are
Hmm.
in the solar system, what constellation they're going through.
Okay.
And then the houses, think of a circle, like a circle in the sky.
Mhm.
Our Earth is round in a circle. Think of a circle. And
Okay.
that circle is the zodiac. And it's divided into 12 pie pieces.
Yeah.
And each one of those pie pieces represents a part of our life. One of the pie pieces might represent your romantic life, your marriage. One might represent your work. One might represent your health. One might represent your early childhood. So each place that that planet falls in the chart is going to tell a story. So let's say you've got this sun in Sagittarius, your sun sign Sag. Let's say that sun sign falls in the 10th house of career.
Okay.
You're going to want to have a big career. You're going to want to express yourself in a big career. You might want to work for yourself because Sagittarius doesn't really like taking orders so much. Sag is a wonderful teacher. So you might think about a career where you're a teacher. Sagittarius is a perpetual student teacher. They love to learn, but they also want to share. So what are you doing? You're on a podcast where you're sharing information with your
Yeah,
audience.
definitely.
It's a very Sagittarius kind of thing to do.
Thank you.
One of the best things about getting chart, you're in a good career for you. One of the best things about getting your chart done is that the astrologer will look at where are the planets going to be in the future. And they're going to say, you know what? It looks like this may be coming up for you down the road, or this might be something to think about. Just like you take advice from an investment person, I may say, you know what? It looks like there may be some financial challenges coming up for you in the fall. I'm just telling you how I'm interpreting this, what I think this is going to show up for you like. So you're thinking about buying a new car in the summer, and you go, you know what? That astrologer told me there may be some financial challenges in the fall. I'm going to wait to buy this car till after the fall.
No. But
And
I
then
want
in
the
the
new
fall, you
car
discover
though.
you need a new roof. And guess what? You have the money. You can't afford a new car. Well, nobody can afford a new car now.
Yeah, did I get into that? So I was gonna say is how did all this become about? Because I feel like when you're describing me, like you've done some kind of like psychological profile and been following me my whole life because you're just like answering all sorts of personality. I'm like, all right, so like, have you been watching me on the camera or do like hit a recording device or whatever you're doing your research on me? Because I'm like, a lot of this stuff is kind of like spot on, and so my thing is, it's like, do you know the history of like how astrology became into this big way of studying? Do you know any of that history of where it might have began?
Well, we're talking about a field that's thousands and thousands of years old.
Yeah,
This goes back to the time of humans looking up at the sky at the stars, back in the times when you could see all the stars in the sky because we didn't have the pollution or whatever that we have
yeah,
now.
yeah.
And think about saying, you know what? That star looks like an arrow, or that star looks like a bucket, or
Hmm.
it's man looking up at the stars and figuring things out. Man worked with the land, growing their own food back then. They didn't buy it in the grocery store. So they may notice, oh, when the moon is over here, I have a good crop. And when the moon is over there, I tend to not have a good crop. over thousands of years, they started to put it together little by little by little. In ancient times, the advisors to the kings and queens and pharaohs and emperors, they were astrologers. They would look up at the stars and say, this is not a good time to go to war. You know, over time, astrology and astronomy diverted. And astronomy is looked at as a legitimate science where you are studying the solar system and the stars. Astrology lost favor, and in many ways, it's still recovering. Astrology for many years has been looked at as, oh, I can't think you believe in that stuff. You're a smart person, or, but astrology is not a belief system. It's just a piece of advice.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
So they go together, but astronomy is much more respected than astrology is, even today.
Well, I'm assuming
If you don't mind
astronomy.
my asking, and you do not have to answer this.
What? Go ahead, ask.
I was going to ask you if you know what your wife's sun sign is.
I know my wife's a Gemini. That's all. I know she's a Gemini, and she was born. And I like the good personality, not the bad, not the evil one. I'm kidding. She's a but I know that the Gemini is a weird sign because it's the twin sign, and I never understood if it's like maybe it's like two personalities or the person is split into two people or what the. Maybe you can explain what the Gemini sign means because I know it's like there's two in the one.
Gemini is a sign of duality.
Duality.
And in the body, it rules
Okay.
things we have two eyes, two ears. And every sign has its high side, the beautiful expression of that sign.
Okay.
But every sign also has its shadow side, the side that's not so fun. The not so fun side of Sagittarius or Gemini. Gemini is an air sign, so they love to communicate. I bet you and your wife are always talking to each other, always having ideas, always bouncing things off each other. But you have very different ways of expressing that. Sagittarius is going to be big picture. Gemini is more about the minutia. Have you done this? Have you done that? And you're like, no, stop nagging me. I'll get to it, kind of thing. So Gemini is a little bit more. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to make trouble for you and your wife.
No,
I don't want her mad at me.
this is all joking aside. I'm still like, how do you know these things? There's a microphone in my living room when I'm getting in trouble. I knew it. I found the bug. I knew. I'm just kidding. No, she's great. And does your birth year and the date you were born on have any effect on your collective of a personality within the sign? Did that have anything to do with it?
Yes, in order to create what we call a natal chart for a person, we need three pieces of information: your date of birth, month, day, and year; your place of birth, city and state, or city and country, and your time of birth, AM, PM. Wow. And with those three pieces of information, there's a computer program that will calculate the placement of all of the planets.
Wow.
And give you a natal chart. Jeez. Now comes the harder part, where as an astrologer, you have studied all of those planets. You have studied all of those signs. So I can talk to you about what it means when your moon is going to be in Leo and your sun is going to be in Sag, your Mercury is going to be in Capricorn, or whatever it is. I can talk to you about those things and share that with you. And sometimes I see this a lot with clients. It's very validating for them. Like, yes, I've always felt like that, but nobody else agrees with me. So sometimes just having somebody share that with you and say, yes, I see this here, kind of thing, can really give a person confidence in themselves. And that's a good thing.
And I was going to go back.
I look at it as a good thing.
Well, going back to where you're saying that astronomy and astrology were kind of together at once, but then astrology is more of like science-based facts, absolutes, where I feel like astrology, it's more of like you're collecting all this types of data and just giving an opinion of what might happen. Am I kind of along the right lines?
Yes, to some degree, yes.
Yeah, to some degree, I'm not
It's
like
giving
totally
an
accurate, but
opinion.
you're taking all the history, all the things that kind of happened, when you were born, the date and the year and all that, and you can kind of make assumptions just based off of a lot of data that can support it. It's not 100% as you're saying, it's not absolute, but there's a lot of instances and data to back up the claims that the you're making in an astronomy report. Am I on the right track here?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. That's what I always thought it is. It's like
Yes,
it,
absolutely.
it's kind of like when you take like assessment test or whatever. It's not everything's going to be absolute. Like not anything can be 100% unless it is, which I know and saying that in itself is also really bad. But I always found it fascinating when you're talking about all these different information, the stuff I didn't even know is involved with reading of the stars. So, I mean, and I believe astrology should still be around because you have to study the planets because back in the day we didn't have all the data we knew. We just had the planets. We had stars and planets we can look at to be like, all right, now the winter's about to end because these stars are kind of like here in the way the world is. So it's good to start planning, and then when you start cultivating your crop because there might be stars that only come when it's hey, last year these stars were out and it was like time for us to start harvesting the food or whatever. And then, when winter's coming and spring and summer, all because alignment of the stars and planets and everything else. So there is, to me, there's a lot of facts behind horoscopes and knowing your signs and stuff because it's, like you said, it's thousands upon thousands of years old. Probably maybe 10,000, even to 20,000 years old. We've been looking at the stars for probably as long as humans have been around.
I'm going to say that most of the people that go to an astrologer to have an astrology reading, they're not necessarily looking for science. They're looking for self-understanding. And most
Yeah.
of the people that come to me are looking to better understand themselves. And that's a wonderful thing to receive from an astrology reading.
Yeah.
And lots of times I will be pointing out to them different career paths that might benefit them or they might be good at. And lots of times I might be saying, oh, this is a very artistic chart. Have you ever thought about doing something creatively or in the arts? They're like, oh my God, I love to do this, but my parents wanted me to become an accountant. So I'm being an accountant. But here's somebody they don't know saying this might be a joyful career path for you. And so lots of times it reassures us that what we think about ourselves is right. What we're drawn to is good for us. Like, oh, I always wanted to do that, but I never thought I had any talent. And here you are telling me I have some talent. So it's a way of listening to ourselves from a different perspective and understanding ourselves in different ways. And I love seeing that happen for people when their face lights up and goes, oh, yeah, I've always wanted to do that. You know,
Yeah.
that's a nice moment. That's
Yeah.
good
And
for
I,
me, astrology.
it's funny when you talk about astrology. I never thought of it as like kind of being more self-aware and to self-improve yourself, better understanding yourself, and then through all that, that actually makes sense. And like I'm learning something today. I've never thought of it that way. I always think of like when you want to better understand yourself, you go talk to a psychologist or a shrink to kind of understand how your brain works. But I mean, this in its way can actually help you understand it as well, just because there's different way of looking at it. And we have the data to prove that, even if you don't fit into this norm, there's like kind of a synopsis of majority of things happen within this realm of things that when you were born and in the sign that you have. This is like a majority, not an absolute. I know I'm using big words here to try to sound smart, but I can understand myself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But that does make sense. So
And I would absolutely tell people to go to a counselor, go to a therapist, because A reading is like a one and done. I can read for you and I tell you your chart, but with a therapist, they're really going to help you work through whatever your issues are. Where that's not really the astrologer's job. They're not a
No,
therapist.
no.
I may be reading a chart and I'm saying, this looks like there may be some difficulty here with the father. Is your father still alive? No, he died when I was 9 and I was traumatized by his death, and I'm talking to a therapist. So the issue will show up in the chart. But if you want to start working to heal that issue, you would need to go to a therapist.
God.
I work with several therapists who send me part of their clients and say, get your chart done, because an astrology reading can often say, dig here. Many times people go to a therapist for one problem, but it's really something else that's the problem. And so they absolutely can work together in harmony.
I was just gonna say that's really cool that like you guys are able to work together and do things like that. I haven't even thought about that until just thinking of it with listening to you. And I just it's funny how those can kind of work, hand in hand, but also still be its own field of expertise as well. That
Jung was a big astrologer.
yeah.
Carl Jung. He was big into dreams and into astrology. And when you're seeking to heal, you use every tool at your disposal. And astrology can be one of those tools. So it just depends on what is right for each individual.
Now, I want to ask you, since we talked a lot about different things and stars, or whatever, how did you become involved with it? What made you become an expert in it? Like, what is the factor in life that you did? Were you just like a kid and you're like, you know what, I like stars, I want to learn about them? Or was it like a point in time?
It was kind of an accident. Um, I think I got my very first astrology book in the 70s, and it was Linda Goodman's Sun Signs. And
Okay.
I started to read the explanations of the different signs. And I was like, oh my God, this explains my whole family. Like it was like somebody give me the key to figuring out my family. Now I get it. So it was a big moment for me. And after that, I was sort of drawn a little bit to astrology, but I didn't do anything. I mean, I was a teenager at that time. So I sort of, would read the horoscope and touch into those things. But it was not until much later that I was living in Atlanta, and there was an organization, sort of like a, not a metaphysical bookstore, but maybe a spiritual center
Okay.
in Atlanta that was called the Foundation of Truth. And they offered different classes and things. And I said, you know what? I'm going to take a class in tarot. And I took a tarot class. And I said, oh my God, this is so complicated. The moon, little moon up here means this, and the stars mean this, and the water means that, and the blue color is this, and you turn it upside down. I'm like, I can't do this. This is too complicated. So I decided to take a beginning astrology class. And I signed up for the astrology class. I thought, oh, this is much easier. I can do this much easier. And actually, tarot is a lot easier than astrology. But I took the class and I said, I really like this. It's explaining things to me. So I took a second class, an intermediate class. By the time I got to intermediate class, my friends and family were asking me to read their chart, like, read my chart, read my chart. So, I mean, I'm just practicing on them and reading their chart. And then one of my friends was a professional counselor and psychic. And he said, Susan, you're really good at this. You should do this professionally. And I said, no. I was working in corporate America.
Right. Making that money.
Right. I had salary I could count on, paid vacations, sick
Yeah.
leave, good dental plan. No way I was
Right.
going to go be an astrologer. So he didn't push it. And a few weeks later, I got a phone call from somebody. And it was a client that worked with him. And she called me up. I'd never heard of her, never spoken to her. And she said, I want an astrology reading. So-and-so told me you did this and that I should call you and get one. And I said, no. I said, oh, no, I'm just a student. I don't know anything. Go to a real astrologer. And she said, he told me you would say that. And he told me I had to insist on getting a reading. So this woman and I argued on the phone for 20 minutes. Her insisting I'm supposed to read for her, me saying I can't do that. And finally I gave in and I said, oh, all right, I'll read for you as long as you know I don't know anything, you know. So this woman came, her reading went on for almost 3 hours. I just kept reading and reading and reading and reading. And she left and she told somebody else who told somebody else who told somebody else. And for a long time, I did this part-time. I worked in corporate America full-time and I did astrology on nights and weekends. And then one day, my spirit guides tapped me on the shoulder and they were like, you need to leave and do this full-time. And just like that, I was out the door.
Wow.
And I became a full-time astrologer.
So
So
it's funny. It's basically your friend saying like, "Hey, you need to do this. You need to do this. You need to do this," and then you're like, "No, I have a cushy job. I have everything I need. I'm going to be taking care of me and my family. I'm good." And then he's like, "Yeah, sure, but you need to know your destiny. This is what you're destined to do, man, Miss Reynolds." And obviously, you made the right choice because
he was right. I was wrong.
Wait. Did a woman just say that she was wrong? Whoa, first time in I'm kidding. Sorry.
I can see you and your wife will never disagree. Yeah.
I didn't say that. That was a joke. Sorry. My humor gets the best of me. There anything you want to say before we wrapped up this great interview? Because I feel like we just had so much fun, and I like to keep things, at a certain time limit because otherwise we'll just go on and on to have a great conversation before it's dinner time. So,
Well, I will say that the year 2025 is going to be a very dramatic year. This year, we have some things happening, some big planets changing signs that have not done this in many, many, many years. So we are going to have a year this year that is full of change, full of new energies that we haven't ever had to deal with before. And it may be a bit of a bumpy ride. But as we go into 26, things are going to get easier. In 27, they're going to get easier. This is going to bring in new opportunities, new ways of looking things. So it looks more difficult in 25, gets easier in 26. I'm also going to say every month on my website, which is exploreastrology.com, I put out free predictions for every one of the 12 signs to say, this is what's going to go on with your sign this month. So if you want to know what's going to go on with Sagittarius in the month of April, go to Explore Astrology, and there's a tab that says monthly predictions. Click on it and see what is going on with your personal sign. And you don't have to join anything. You don't have to pay anything. It's just my way of giving back. And while you're on my website, on the Explore Astrology, there's a place where you can sign up for my free newsletter. And every month I send out a newsletter, totally free. You don't have to join anything or buy anything, where I give you information about the new moon and the full moon for that month. So I do my best to give back and to share with the community. And that's some of the ways that I do that.
wow. Hey, you know what? That's better than most people. At least you're trying to give back to the community. Thank you so much for joining me for this interview, and I can't wait to get this all put together. You've been amazing.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm on all platforms. You can either look me up by my name, Leslie Madewell, or my photography company, Madewell Art Photography. I know I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, now known as X. If you want to buy my book, it is on Amazon. Just go to Amazon, check out the book section, type in my name, Leslie Madewell, and my book, Pathway of the Vengeance, will pop up. And I will be leaving a link in the show notes in every episode. And if you want to leave me a review or comment on any of the platforms that you listen to podcasts, please do that. I will appreciate it. And I hope I see you on the next episode.